Hello, and welcome to Mark's Woodworking Challenges. I'm Mark, your host. On my channel, we tend to present three different kinds of videos. One about hand planes, another about hand tools and hand tool techniques, and lastly, in a distant third place, the occasional power tool challenge. Today, at long last, we have a hand plane challenge. Yes, you heard that correctly. I know it's been a long time since we had a hand plane challenge, and I'd like to thank you guys who have stuck with the channel waiting for another hand plane challenge to appear. Much appreciated. But yes, so as I've said before, I do not have an infinite supply of vintage hand planes, so inevitably they're going to dry up at some point, but I've still got a few, so it's not completely dry yet, and today we're going to do another one. Today's hand plane challenge is about the Steers Patent 304. This particular one manufactured by the Brattleboro Tool Company. Normally in a hand plane challenge, we compare and contrast two planes at the same time. However, today I think we're just going to do the Steers Patent plane by itself. This plane has a fixed frog and an adjustable mouth. That's not a very common design, but we have done this planes with similar designs previously. For example, the Marples X4, also fixed frog with an adjustable mouth. However, these two planes are really different, and it just didn't seem fair to have them compete against each other. This is 1880s, this is 1950s. This is a heavy-duty fixed frog. It's a sort of similar to a infill smoother. This one is a completely different frog design. They're just so different in so many ways that it didn't seem quite right to have them compete against one another. But secondly, the Steers Patent 304 is a feature-rich plane, and it's going to take us quite a bit of time to go through all the features, so in the interest of efficiency, it seemed to make more sense to do it solo. So there you have it. Today, that's the subject of today's video. I like to give a little history for each plane that we feature here in a hand plane challenge. The Steers Patent 304 was made by the Brattleboro Tool Company. All of the history of the Brattleboro Tool Company fits into the years 1883 to 1894. This particular plane is, as I said, a 304. That would be the first series of 300 type planes. We'll get into that in just a minute. These were all made by the Brattleboro Tool Company, and were made somewhere in the period 1883 to 1889, so about a 6-year interval. There was a second series made by the Brattleboro Tool Company, designated as 400 series planes. William Steers had two different patents. The plane you just saw was based on one patent, and the 400 series was based on his second patent. The 400 series had the same arrangement, the same type of corrugated sole, but a completely different depth adjustment mechanism. Unfortunately, I do not own one of these, nor do I have any experience with them, and that's too bad, because that would have been a natural compare and contrast for the 304. But c'est la vie. The 400 series planes were manufactured a little bit later, from 1885 onwards. Then we come to the second series of the second version of the 300 series planes, where the same corrugated sole was still used. That would seem to be the overriding hallmark of the Steers patent planes. But now they used the corrugated sole, but with a Bailey type adjuster. So that was the final version manufactured from, I think, 89 to about 91, so a fairly brief period. Obviously things were probably spiraling downward at that point. Now this is not to say that all three different series, 300 number 1, 400, and 300 number 2, were all made by the Brattleboro Tool Company. The Brattleboro Tool Company sort of went belly up around 1887, and so that would be 83 on the front end, 87 on the back end, a fairly brief lifespan. Either they were bought by the C.E. Jennings Company of New York, or the Jennings Company purchased the rights to manufacture the planes after the Brattleboro Tool Company went out of business. I'm not 100% sure. But the Jennings Company came in from 1887 onwards, and they continued to manufacture some of the 300 series, and the first 300 series, and the 400 series, and they were the only manufacturer of the second 300 series. Yes, I know it's complicated to keep straight. So, and then, but that was, like I say, that manufacture ended in 91, and I think everything pretty much ceased in about 1894. So there you have it, the brief but sad history of the Steers patent planes. I also like to give a little bit of economics when I do these comparisons. In 1885, a 304 sold for $3.25. Now I can't find a Stanley price list from the mid-80s, 1880s that is, and so the closest I could come is 1902, and there a Stanley 4 sold for $2.25. So that means the Steers patent plane was about a good solid 50% more expensive than a Stanley number 4. But apparently there's a fair number of Steers patent planes in the wild, so they must have sold a fair number of them, and that indicates that quite a few people were willing to pay the premium. I mean, probably sort of like why people paid the premium for the Bedrock series. But one thing I would say is it's tempting to speculate. When we go into the details of this plane, you're going to see that a lot of these design features are fairly complicated and must have been fairly difficult to manufacture, or fairly expensive to manufacture. So it's, like I say, I'm speculating here, but it might well be that profit margins were slim owing to manufacturing cost, because you can only sell a plane for market value. You might have wanted to charge $450 instead of $325, but you couldn't. And so perhaps that led to the early demise of the company. Who knows? If someone out there knows more details about that, by all means, let us know. Okay, let's do a close examination of this unusual plane. The most distinguishing feature of a Steers patent plane is the rosewood strips on the bottom. You can see that there are 4 ahead of the mouth and 3 afterwards. These strips are basically supposed to serve the same function as corrugation in an all-metal plane, like a Stanley C type, 4C for example. So this is, of course, a sort of a unique way of solving the problem, reducing friction on the workpiece. Now it's going to be a little hard to tell here, but these strips are dovetailed into the sole of the plane. So fairly tricky from a manufacturing point of view, I would guess. We have, what other features do we have? This particular plane has been cracked and repaired here, but the tote is sort of pretty normal looking, a sort of a low knob type motif. The next thing we'll look at is the mouth adjuster, the mouth opening adjustment. Basically, the Steers patent plane, it has a piece of metal right here, riveted at the top, but free to move at the bottom. The bottom of it is shown right here. And what happens is you tighten or loosen these 2 screws right here, and they push against that metal flap. It is kind of a flap because it just sits in there and goes like that. You use these screws to adjust how close that is to the cutter, i.e. the mouth opening. Now the sort of downside of this is as you move this way, it opens up a gap on the front end, and I've experienced, as well as others I think, that when you do that, stuff collects in that gap and you have to kind of be constantly cleaning it out. Moving on, I think we're about ready to take it apart. So let's look at the cutter assembly next. So what we have here is not a double iron like in a Stanley, but a single iron where the lever cap is functioning as an integral cap iron. So this little piece right here is a bolt that goes through this rectangular piece of metal, but the bottom of the bolt has is basically got a nib that fits into one of the holes on the cutter. So you basically find whatever hole you want to use, but then once you loosen this, you can slide this assembly up and down to make sure that the end of the cap, the end of the lever cap, which as I say is functioning as a chip breaker, is at the appropriate distance to the edge of the cutter. Basically, the nice part about this is that you can make this adjustment. You know, in previous cases where I've commented on the use of the lever cap as an integrated cap iron, sometimes you can only adjust it after it's already installed in the plane, and it becomes very difficult to see just where the end of the lever cap is relative to the end of the cutter. Whereas in this arrangement, you can do that out of the plane and then put it into the plane when you're ready to tighten it down. Of course, Stanley does this by just having a slot in the cutter where the cap iron moves up and down, and basically you get the same net effect. Okay, so that all fits into the body of the plane. As I said, this is a fixed frog. There's no way to move, there is no frog to move it back and forth. You've got a machined area down here to provide the support right down close to the sole of the plane. The depth adjustment mechanism has another nib right here. Might be a little difficult to see on the camera, but this little nib here also fits into a hole in the cutter, so that when you move it up and down, that's how you adjust your depth. Lastly, what we're going to do is take this thing out, and if you want to own one of these things, an offset screwdriver is a very nice thing to have. It'll take me a minute. We may fast forward through this part. You do have to take one of the screws out. So what you have here for this piece is the depth knob is basically a large bolt. It's held captive in there. There's a pin right here that keeps the bolt in one place. When you turn it in and out, the bolt engages this gear here, and we'll just do that. You can see it fits in there nicely, and as you turn the knob, the nib goes up and down to adjust the depth. Other little features here is when it's in here, there's actually a casting here that's shaped so that it fits snugly against the front end of this raised casting on the bottom of the plane, so that sort of enforces a particular distance. There's a little fin right here that, as far as I can tell, doesn't actually support the cutter at all, and so its use is a little mysterious. You've got protrusions here. These are what the cutter assembly fits under, so that when you tighten it, it levers against this to press the end of the cutter down on the machined surface. And that is most of the features of the plane. Let's see, one thing I was going to mention is that in 90% of these that you see in the wild, this mechanism right here is MIA, but And that's a problem, because when you are adjusting the depth up and down, that's what keeps the lever cap and the cutter in the same relationship. So if in one of those planes where that's missing, you're going to adjust the cutter up and down, and the exposure right here is going to vary basis the depth of the cutter. So often those are MIA, and they're darned hard to find on the aftermarket. Another thing to note is this is not a very fancy cutter, but it is specific to this plane. So a proprietary plane iron. And lastly, you can see on this cutter 304, and you can faintly make out lettering right here. In this case, it's almost impossible to read, but that's likewise identifying marks. And I think it basically it's Steers patent with a date. I'd have to check on that to be sure, because I certainly can't read it right off hand here. So proprietary plane iron. The little part here, you have to be careful that it's not MIA. And last but not least, possibly most important, is that when all this is put together, there is no lateral adjustment on this plane as far as I can tell. What we're going to do is put it back together real quick if we can. You can see just how quick it'll go, hopefully. That went better than expected. Tighten it down. Tighten this one down. Slide the cutter assembly in underneath those supports and tighten it down, and you're pretty much ready to go with obvious fine-tuning required. So in all of that, I see no provision for lateral adjustment. And one would think that it would be pretty obvious if it was there. There is just no lateral adjustment on this plane. And so that indeed can be a little bit of a problem. So I'll talk about that more later. So there you have it. There are the details of the Brattleboro, say that fast, 5 times. The Brattleboro Tool Company number 304 Steers patent smoothing plane. That is most of the details involved. Okay, let's see if we can take some shavings. Okay, we're ready to test this Brattleboro Tool Company Steers patent 304 in a shavings test. Now, since I don't have another plane to compare it to, this will be a fairly quickie. We just want to basically see if it'll take a shaving. But I am going to do it twice. I'm going to do it once with the mouth closed up fairly tightly, maybe a 1/16 of an inch there or so. And then I'm going to back it off and do a more open mouth, and we'll see if we can see a difference. Okay, let's give it a try. Now I want to say that I have not actually very carefully jointed this test board ahead of time, so But you know, it's taken an okay shaving. I also say the blade on this thing is a little bit squirrely, so all that taken together, I'm just looking to see if I'm getting a shaving. It's a nice shaving, fairly thin, not super thin, but I also haven't flattened the bottom of this thing any. So, in fact, I frankly don't know exactly how flat it is, but it's taken a shaving. So let's open up the mouth. Well, the screws are basically pretty much all the way out. And so that's as open as we're going to get it. Apparently it's not going to come up 100% gap free, but it's different than what it was. So let's take another shaving and see what happens. Actually, if anything, that was a little better than the first time. In fact, I mean, you know, that's not the best shaving I've ever gotten, but it's pretty competent. So I'm probably I'm a little thin on this side compared to this side. That's probably due to the fact that I don't have a perfectly perpendicular grind and hone on the blade, and normally it's impossible to be perfectly perpendicular, and you use your lateral adjustment lever to take out those tiny errors. But when you don't have a lateral adjustment lever, what do you do? So there you have it. So what did we find out about the Steers Patent 304? Well, it seemed to work adequately to take a shaving with a nice sharp cutter, so no problems there. The mouth adjuster tends to, you know, it has a gap ahead of the little plate thing, and that tends to accumulate debris that you have to clean out once in a while, so not great. This example, and of course when they were new, and you know, goes without saying, this example, the rosewood is in very good shape, but you'll see in the wild that there's a lot of examples out there with rosewood strips that have gone to crap. So if you're looking for one of these, be aware of that. But probably the most important thing that struck me about this plane is no lateral adjustment. Or if there is a lateral adjustment on this plane, I couldn't find it. Maybe somebody knows better than me. But I think that's basically the case. No lateral adjustment. And that's a serious problem, at least for practical use of this thing. Also commercially, because Stanley introduced lateral adjustment in 1885, basically about the exact same time that the Brattleboro tool company was making this plane. So, you know, if you got a cheaper Stanley Bailey, significantly cheaper probably, with lateral adjustment and you know, an undoubtedly simpler design, you're probably behind the 8 ball from a competition point of view. So, but at any rate, for me at least, and maybe for the guys back in the 1880s, no lateral adjustment probably made some people antsy. So in conclusion, like any well-sharpened plane, it'll take a shaving. If you're looking for one of these, be aware that they're relatively expensive, and 90% of them don't have the little thing here, the little cap iron retention screw. And so with all of the things that I've said and the comments and the lack of lateral adjustment, my opinion is this thing is probably best left to the Steers patent collectors. If you're just looking for a nice vintage hand plane, you probably should steer clear. So there you have it. Thanks for tuning into the video. As always, I love to have comments. Please hit that like button. And by all means, if you like this and any of the other videos that I've done, please consider subscribing. And so without further ado, we'll see you next time on Mark's Woodworking Challenges.